welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 122, I'm joined again by Amy Bantham. Now, you may remember Amy from episode 33, where we talked about making health clubs an essential community resource, which we put out over 2 years ago. This episode is kind of an extension on that concept with a twist. It's about Amy's new book, Move to Live More. And this book, she talks to 20 thought leaders in the youth physical activity space. Now, you might be thinking that in the fitness industry, we don't do a lot with youth physical activity. And as we're going to point out in this conversation, that might be the real opportunity in what Amy's talking about in this book. The youth are a underserved, or in some cases not served at all, demographic by our industry, yet there's a lot of demand for physical activity and movement-oriented services that are non-sport or athletic-based with our youth. And in this conversation, Amy's going to make the business case as to why this is such an important population to consider how to engage with, but she's also going to provide some actionable steps that you can take to consider how to effectively engage with this population. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page. That's by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 122. Please enjoy this conversation with Amy Bantham. Today, we're delighted to be joined again by my good friend, Amy Bantham. Amy, thank you so much for joining us again.
Mike, so good to be here. It's been 2 years since I've been on the Wellness Paradox podcast, and here we are. Thank you for inviting me back.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. And, interestingly enough, on the 19th of May, in just 4 short days, we'll be celebrating our 3-year anniversary as a podcast. So it's kind of hard to believe.
Time flies. That's good. Yeah, I'm in my 5th season for the Move to Live More podcast. And looking back, I almost can't believe it.
Yeah, I like how you do seasons. I do years, you do seasons. I feel like it's all the same thing. So you were on an episode 33 about making health clubs an essential community resource. And so I really recommend people go back and check that episode out, because there was a lot of good conversation. But on the chance that people didn't hear that episode, can you just briefly give us an idea of your background to provide some context for our discussion today?
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to. And I actually was just reviewing our episode 33 because I included it in my newsletter this month. Cool. And so I was reviewing it in preparation. I thought it was very relevant to include. So my background is my entry into the industry is as a fitness professional. I've been teaching group exercise since the mid-90s. And I'm a certified group exercise instructor, personal trainer, and health coach. And that was really my entry into the industry. I have played many roles in the industry. I worked at IHRSA for 11 years, working on advocacy and on health promotion, health policy. I helped them start their 501c3, the IHRSA Foundation, which is focused on helping health and fitness centers open their doors to people with chronic disease and disability. I went back to school in 2017 and got my doctorate of public health. And my dissertation topic was around what you and I talk about an awful lot, which was integrating healthcare and health and fitness. Okay. And as part of my dissertation, I launched Move to Live More, which integrated those two sectors and added in the community sectors. And so for the past 4 years, I've been working with for-profit companies, not-for-profits, with foundations, with organizations that are working to get people moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do a lot of amazing work. One thing you did leave out, because the list is kind of long, is you're an immediate past president of the Physical Activity Alliance, which it probably won't come up so much in this discussion, but that's the nation's largest group of physical activity advocates that are involved in policy and systems change work. So you really touch multiple sectors in our industry, which is why I always enjoy our conversations so much. This conversation is actually a different one, and it's about the book that you just released, titled, and I have it right here for those of you that are watching, titled "Move to Live More," the name of your company. And so this book I found to be a very, very interesting read, particularly from my perspective as an exercise professional. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, I was inspired to write the book by a couple things. One was through my podcast.
Mm.
I was interviewing thought leaders in the physical activity and youth sports space, and a lot of the themes that came out were around addressing physical inactivity among kids. And I really honed in on three areas. And I took a whole child health approach when I wrote the book. And the three areas were physical health, mental health, and academic development. So one is I had a lot of the information. Two is I had a problem, and that was during the pandemic with my family and my three kids. In my family, in my community, trying to get our kids moving, trying to get our kids back to school so they could be connected to their peers, so they could be back in PE. I really saw how much kids were really suffering. And I think we've seen a lot since the pandemic ended is that kids really need movement. We had obesity levels skyrocket. We had physical inactivity levels skyrocket. They need it for their physical health, but we also see the rates of anxiety and stress and depression. And then we see the pandemic learning loss. And I talk about this in the book, and I use my own community as an example. My kids were out of school for 13 months.
Mm.
We have 13 months of math loss,
Yeah.
math learning loss in our community. So they didn't gain anything during that time. And we have about 6 months of reading loss. And so really thinking about, and I frame this as a problem, but the book really frames it as innovative solutions for getting kids moving. And I tried to, as a researcher myself, I wanted to include research, but I really first and foremost wanted it to be a guide, an actionable guide for anyone who works with kids.
Mm-hmm.
So parents, caregivers, coaches, teachers, fitness professionals, for how and why to get kids moving for better physical health, mental health, and academic development.
Yeah, that's what I love about your approach and a lot of the things you do. It is very research based, but it's also practical. I think white papers and research are very important, but I think both you and I, who come from a similar background as a frontline exercise professional, we really value things that we can read and learn and then apply to the problems that we see on a day by day basis. And I also find it interesting that like most great things in life, it comes from problems you're facing, in your own life, in your own household. And you weren't alone during the pandemic, certainly with the challenges that you talked about facing.
Yeah, and I certainly, sometimes I'm wearing my parent hat, sometimes I'm wearing my fitness professional hat, sometimes I'm wearing my local community advocate hat. Some of the work that I do around getting kids moving started before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw that kids in our community just weren't moving enough. They weren't moving enough before school, during school, after school, on the weekends. And so I got involved in my district wellness committee and focused. So to me, it's a bottom up and a top down approach. So the grassroots perspective, but also we banded together and worked to change our district wellness policy to support more outdoor movement in our school systems. So a lot of the problems I talk about in the book predate the pandemic. They were simply exacerbated by the pandemic. And again, to your point, we are on the front lines. We are constantly trying to find ways to help everyone in our networks get kids moving, because kids who move become adults who move. And so instilling healthy habits, if you think about bang for the buck in terms of healthcare cost, if you think about the importance of habit formation, we really need to start early. And so I really wanted to have a roadmap to the parents and caregivers and coaches and teachers, everyone that I've talked with over the last couple of years who feel so alone in, well, how do I get kids to put down their phones and go outdoors?
Mhm.
How do I get my school to offer more movement in school? And just really trying to, one, let them know they're not alone, and two, that there are 50 tips and 50 takeaways in the book for how to get started today.
Yeah, and we're gonna dive into some of that. But you said something that I think is really important, and as you know, this podcast largely listened to by exercise professionals, and exercise professionals, broadly speaking, don't do the best job of serving the kind of the extremes of the spectrum. Like we do really well with people like between the ages of 25 and 50 maybe. But as you start to get to the tails of that distribution, particularly on the younger tail of that distribution, we don't do the best job of serving those for a number of reasons. And what you said that I think is so important to highlight is that active kids become active adults. So if nothing else, just the thing that we're talking about here is so important, is these are your future members and these are your future clients. The less physically literate our kids are, the less likely they are to walk through our doors in the future. So that is certainly one reason for fitness professionals and exercise professionals to really hear this conversation. But I kind of want to hear it from you, just from a broad perspective. Why should fitness and exercise professionals care about a book like this, which it seems like maybe this is for teachers and coaches, but maybe not exercise professionals? After reading it, I would disagree, but I think that it's important for you to state from your perspective.
Yeah, I think what you point out is really important. This is not just a nice to have, like, oh, wouldn't it be great to get more kids moving? There's actually a very strong business case for this. And I actually, from my podcast last week, I interviewed a woman who heads up the Sporting Goods Industry Association worldwide. And she frames physical inactivity levels among kids as an existential threat to the sporting goods industry. And I think that because kids who don't move don't wear sneakers and workout gear, right? And use the equipment. So I think that's a really important way for us as fitness professionals to look at that. Kids who don't move, don't consume programming and services targeted to kids, and they don't grow up to be kids who consume programming and services offered by our sector. So I think there's a really important business case for this. And then I also think we as individual fitness professionals, why is this important? And I was thinking about this in terms of, we play so many different roles as fitness professionals, right? We're instructors. So when we're working with kids, what we do is really important for safety, teaching them proper form. It's really important for teaching them about these habits and how to follow through on these habits, which will put them into the pipeline to being these adults in their 20s to 50s that we serve so well. And maybe if they're served well between 20s and 50s, we'll figure out how to serve them well on that other tail end. We're role models for them. So thinking about, and I talk about this in the book, there's a lot of talk right now, somewhat surprising to me, that we're surprised that kids being on their phones and behind screens for up to 9 hours a day is impacting their health, their mental health.
Shocking.
Shocking. And really thinking about how we can be role models who put down our phones and work with kids to get them moving both indoors and outdoors, how we can play a role in helping to connect them, to reconnect them to their peers.
Mm.
And there's less of a role for fitness professionals, maybe in creating unstructured, unsupervised outdoor time. I think a lot of that comes down to the family unit.
Mhm.
But I think if kids are getting active through, and I work with brick and mortar clients who offer after school programming for kids and see that as really important, not only I guess taking a whole family approach to what they offer. And so the health club member who's the adult is happy because their kids are being served. I also worked in my community to try to broker an agreement between the public school system, which was moving from offering a lot of outdoor active programming to not really having the staff to offer any. And is there an opportunity for public schools to partner with health and fitness centers to offer programming? So again, back to this market and business case and this imperative for getting kids moving. But I do think that when you look at the National Physical Activity Guidelines, kids need 60 minutes a day of aerobic and muscle strengthening and bone strengthening. And fitness professionals have such an important role for that instructor role for really teaching what is aerobic activity, what's moderate, what's vigorous, what's muscle strengthening, what's bone strengthening, how can we do each of these safely and effectively? So I think there's a tremendous opportunity for fitness professionals.
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you a little bit more about one of our strategic partners as a podcast. As many of you know, the wellness paradox is all about closing off the trust, interaction, and communication gap between fitness professionals and the medical community. And no organization does that better than the Medical Fitness Association. They are the professional member association for the medical fitness industry. And this is the industry that integrates directly with healthcare in many facilities throughout the entire country. The MFA is your go-to source for all things medical fitness. They provide newsletters, webinars. They even have standards and guidelines for medical fitness facilities. They do events around the entire country. And most importantly, they are one of the more engaging networks in the entire fitness industry. I personally have benefited from the network that I've developed through the Medical Fitness Association. And I highly recommend that all of you that are interested in solving the wellness paradox engage with the MFA. To find out more about the Medical Fitness Association, you can go to their website, medicalfitness.org. That's medicalfitness.org. Now back to today's episode. Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's funny we're having this conversation now. I had a conversation with a member at my facility. This is actually just over the weekend, and he said to me, he said, I've just got back into exercising. When I was younger, the high school I went to only had exercise opportunities for the jocks, for the athletes. And
Yeah.
and this was a gentleman probably in, I'm going to say his early to mid 30s, and over time we've kind of engineered physical education out of schools for a number of reasons, which is a separate, very sad conversation to have. And, it just kind of struck me in that conversation that, that is more true now than it ever has been. Like if you're an athlete, there's a lot of opportunities for you to exercise, in and around your school day. But if you're not, that's become progressively less and less and less over time. So in some cases, health clubs as a community resource are maybe some of the only places that children have the opportunity to have structured activity.
Yeah, there's been this tremendous divide. And what I really appreciate about the physical literacy approach, which I talk about in my book, which is essentially helping kids develop the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be active for life.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, part of that is giving every kid the opportunity to view themselves as an athlete, however they define athlete,
Yep.
as someone who moves. And I think that foundational skills development is really critical.
Yeah.
And there is a tremendous opportunity to try to fill in that gap. And I talk about on my podcast, and I talk about it in the book, where I have some guests who were athletes from very early on and pursue a that passion by becoming a fitness professional. I also have people who hated PE. And I talk about this in the book, being picked last.
Yep.
I certainly fall into that camp. And because of that, wanting to help the insufficiently active become even a little bit active and to see themselves as someone who can move. And I talk about positivity and empowerment and self-affirmation. And I feature organizations that really work on helping all kids reap the benefits of movement, because we can all benefit from the teamwork aspect, from the leadership aspect, from the, and I love this chapter, from learning how to manage and navigate risk
Mm-hmm.
and manage risk environments. Really, really important. And this is all every kid should have the opportunity to do this, not just kids who are, as you say, jocks.
Yeah. So let's start to dive in here. As you said, 20 thought leaders, 50 actionable lessons. In the interest of time, we can't get into everything. That's what buying the book is for. Can you find a couple of specific areas to drill down on that you think would be most useful to our audience of fitness professionals that are listening?
Yeah, I started to talk about one organization that is in the mental health section of the book, and it's in the positivity chapter. And it's called Zing for Kids, and it was started by a group exercise instructor just like me who hated PE and got into teaching group exercise because she wanted all kids to have an opportunity to move. And so she really pairs a lot. She works in the New York City public school system and supporting organizations system, and offers these programs to kids and really pairs this foundational skills development with positivity, self-affirmations, and that is absolutely baked in. I think a key theme in Zing for Kids, which winds its way throughout the book, is the importance of framing movement as fun. It's not about skills development, although skills are developed. It's not about physical fitness, although physical fitness is improved, but it's about play and fun and finding activities that kids get excited about and want to do. So it's not something that, oh gosh, another thing that I'm forced to do. And so there is a lot of fun and play throughout the book. And I think fitness professionals thinking about developing curricula targeted to families, targeted to kids of every age and every level and every ability, thinking about making it fun and matching the age level with the activity, with the theme. And I think Zing for Kids does a really interesting and important work with that.
Yeah, and let's be honest, I think that's a lesson, making movement fun. That's a lesson that we need for, all ages, because, to your point, the vast majority of people that don't, meet our guidelines and our recommendations for physical activity, they just don't find it, fun and enjoyable. It's laborious, and it's, as an adult, you don't need one more obligation. We have enough of those. So, I think that is an important lesson to abstract as well, is that I don't care if you're 5, 15, 55, or 105, you want to do things that are enjoyable and fun. And if you can marry, movement and fun, then you have an activity that someone's going to continue to engage with.
Yeah, I talk in the book, and to me, it's just a really helpful way of framing things, is thinking about different touch points in a
Hmm.
kid's life where we can intervene to get them more active, and who has control over those touch points. So, parents and caregivers, we have the most control over before and after school. So, I talk a lot about active transportation, getting kids to walk,
Hmm.
jog,
Hmm.
bike, scooter to and from school. And then when they're at school, what role can teachers play in getting them moving in the classroom? And I interviewed Dr. Rebecca Hassan from your neck of the woods
Yep.
about these brief movement breaks in the classroom and the importance of getting kids up and moving for just a few minutes. You can pair it with a lesson, you can have it stand on its own, and then kids come back, and your return on investment is extremely high because they are ready to engage and ready to focus. And then teachers don't have to spend all of their time, most of their time, on behavior management. And so that's key within schools. So teachers playing a really important role there. After school, I talked a little bit about health and fitness centers partnering with schools to offer after school programming or offering it on their own. And then evenings and weekends, what type of programming can we look at in addition to organized sports? So it's not just organized sport. And I did interview a couple organized sports organizations where they talk about making it fun. It is fun in games, but it's not just fun in games. And so really thinking through what type of teamwork development, what type of leadership development that translates to the classroom, it translates to the workplace, it translates to the boardroom
Hmm.
as you're setting kids up for success. And so thinking through those various touch points, where do parents and caregivers are able to exert control and model behavior? Where are coaches able to model behavior and exert control? Where are teachers able, where are fitness professionals able to? And we as fitness professionals definitely have an opportunity here. And I work with a lot of clients who are really trying to think through their programming and services for youth, because after the pandemic, although drop off programming, I guess, how do I frame this? So drop off when the adults are in the clubs, not particularly popular, but drop off programming for camps and for summer camps, for vacation camps, for weekends, because we were trying to catch our kids up. And so there was a lot of demand and appetite for that.
Yeah, so let's stay with that maybe as a way to focus the conversation here as we come towards the end. You know, if I'm a fitness and exercise professional out there and I'm listening to this and this is resonating with me, and yeah, I'm gonna go get the book, but I'm thinking of like, how should I start thinking about this now as a way? How should I? So you're having these conversations. I guess this is the way to explain it. You're having these conversations with people in the industry all the time about how they take advantage of what is this opportunity that has presented itself. What would you recommend as the first couple of steps towards how you start to work on this opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, to me, and where I start absolutely everything is figuring out what the problem is, identifying what the problem is, identifying what the demand is. So
Mhm.
seeing that parents and caregivers, they're hungry for opportunities for their kids. They saw that kids just weren't moving. I've already alluded to the physical inactivity levels. I think kids lost, I mean, I think it was like 17 minutes per day less of physical activity than prior to the pandemic, which was not,
Yeah,
we were we were not in a good place.
yeah.
And then we had families who went from no screen time to 6 hours a day of screen time, and then additional in the evenings. So we have some habits that I think parents and caregivers are like, okay, we need to make up for some lost time. We need to get rid of some habits. And my kids are increasingly isolated. So are there group fitness opportunities that focus on getting kids moving, that focus on connectedness, that focus on empowerment?
Hmm.
that might be of interest, and really trying to figure out I talked about all those different touch points, but also thinking about what are the pain points
Yeah.
for parents and caregivers right now. And I do think parents and caregivers are worried about the amount of phone use, the amount of isolation, the amount of learning loss, and just the where we are in terms of obesity and physical activity levels, and ways to, and I take this approach in the book. It's a whole child health approach. You and I work in silos, and
Mhm.
trying to work across silos and integrate silos and knock down silos. And to me, it's the same thing around kids. We can't just address a problem with physical health. We have to address a problem with mental health and focus and concentration. And physical activity isn't a panacea, it's not the magic bullet, but when we are at a loss for tools for how to address these problems, physical activity is a really important tool that addresses problems across all these three areas that I've mentioned.
Yes, no, it's so true. And again, this represents a win-win opportunity. This kind of, double bottom line kind of thing is this makes good business sense, and it also makes good, public health sense at the same time. And when those two spaces align, those opportunities align, that's always something that I try to look out for running an organization is, how can I do good and do well, at the same time.
Yeah, and how do we do well, not just in the future as we're thinking about kids who grow up to be our members and clients, but they can be members and
Yeah.
clients as part of the whole family, and maybe bringing kids in now by offering really specifically targeted programming and services. It might just bring in the whole family.
Yeah, and I think I know I've seen that where the kid starts and mom and dad come and boy, I actually feel comfortable here. What do you do? So it's such an opportunity. I think the book is a great resource. I know it opened my eyes to a lot of things that I don't often think about as somebody who has largely worked with adults most of his professional career, much like many exercise professionals. So I highly recommend the book. It is a good read. It is also a quick read, with all the content that we're consuming. For those of you that are watching the video, I'm holding it up so you can see the lack of thickness. This is, not Moby Dick by any stretch of the imagination. So
People do get, they worry about it. Oh, I don't know if I have time to read a full-length book. And I really say it's 150 pages. It's 20 chapters, 20 themes, 50 tips, 50 takeaways, really trying to distill it down into bite-sized chunks.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that was very well done. Where can people find the book?
Yeah, so they can get it on Amazon. I am very pleased to report it was the #1 new release in children and exercise when
All
it
right.
released in March. And so I don't know what the N is on that, but I'm gonna take it
Take
and
it. Take it.
run with it. So people can find it on Amazon, Move to Live More, and it comes up. It's available both paperback and Kindle.
When does the version come out that you're narrating?
I have been asked that many, many, many times, and so I need to think about that.
That'd be an interesting one. It's then you could listen to it while you walk or ride your bike or
That,
something like that.
that's right. And for active populations like
Yeah.
the type that we are reaching, I think that's a really key thing to think about. So I have a mentor who just did her audiobook, and so something to think about.
Awesome. We'll be on the lookout for that. So we'll link up to the Amazon link. We'll also link up to the Move to Live More website. You also just recently started publishing a newsletter. You alluded to that earlier. So I think that is some other great content to sign up with and engage with that you're putting out. So great work on the book, Amy. I thought, like I said, it was really, really well done, and I'm glad we got to have this conversation. But before I let you go, when you were on the podcast a couple of years ago, I did pose the wellness paradox question to you, which is, how do we close off this trust, interaction, and communication gap between exercise professionals and the medical community. I'm curious if your answer has evolved at all, or how you would answer that question now compared to a couple of years ago.
I had to laugh, Mike, because I was looking the other day, I was looking through my publications and my presentations
Uh-huh.
over the last couple of years, and each and every single one of them has some type of language in there about bridging the gap,
Mhm.
connecting the dots,
Mhm.
or knocking down silos. And to me, that is a validation not only of your mission, but my mission and how I set up my company, which was to knock down the silos between healthcare, health and fitness, and communities. And bridging the gap is still necessary. And the way to do that is through trusted collaborative relationships and communication. And so I'm going to stick to my guns. It validates what I set up as my mission and vision in 2020. We have by no means achieved the goal of knocking down those silos, but we continue to beat the drum.
Indeed. And I couldn't agree more. I was going to be very surprised if you weren't doubling down on what you said before, because very, very much the same way as I'm thinking of our 3 years as a podcast and what my notions were when I started and what they are now 3 years later. It's just further reinforced everything that you just said. So I appreciate the consistency in messaging, and you and I are very much fighting the same good fight, like I know a lot of our listeners are as well. So Amy Bantham, thank you so much for joining us again on the Wellness Paradox.
Oh, thank you so much for hosting me and being such a wonderful supporter of my book. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Amy as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares make a big difference for us. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page. That's by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 122. Please be on the lookout for our next episode when it drops on the 19th of May. This is our special 3-year anniversary episode where I'll be talking about what I've learned from all of our amazing guests these past 3 years. Until we chat again in that episode, please be well.